Mike Lessiter with Farm Equipment Magazine, here with the Danusers from Danuser Machine Company.
And I'm Janae Danuser.
And I'm Glenn Danuser.
So first question, tell us how you would describe what Danuser does in your scope in the machinery business. Tell us your niche in what the company does.
This is where I get to say that Glenn doesn't really allow me to talk to the customers. I'm the back office, so you give the sales pitch.
All right, so we have about 3 different divisions at Danuser. We have a OEM division, original equipment manufacturer, that we can make parts for all major tractor companies, a lot of tillage, approximately 1,000 customers there. And then we have the Danuser attachment line, which carries our name, of course. And that one is has about 12 to 14 worldwide distributors. That's how we go to market, which they set up the dealers and go to the end users. And then the third one is more of a hobby. It's the recoil reduction devices for the end of shotguns and rifles.
I didn't know about that one. Learned something already. Yeah.
That's kind of a Jerry hobby business that was brought on in the 80s, and we continue to this day.
You have a long storied history, more than most of the manufacturers will sit down with. Tell us about the beginnings of Danuser.
So we started in 1910, and one of the first products was a steam thresher, grain thresher.
See, and as a little sister, I get to interrupt and correct him and say, actually, our great-grandfather, the first product, Danuser product, was more of a farm wagon.
Farm wagon.
He started more in Reedsville, Missouri, and moved his family to Fulton in 1910, and then the other.
Here we go. So in 1945, Grandpa Henry was the first to mass produce the postal digger in the U.S. And from there, it went into the 50s for blades, rakes, box blades, log splitters, post drivers, hydraulic postal diggers, earth augers, pallet forks, concrete breakers, material mixing buckets. We really were doing innovative tools, I would say, in the 50s and 60s. He was way ahead of what everybody else was doing. He would travel overseas, find some good ideas, and bring them back to America. And so that he had a very long relationship with Henry Ford, J.I. Case, used their marketing distribution channels. He went to Henry Ford to talk about a postal digger for his 8-ins, 9-ins. He said, I got something that you need on your tractors. And Henry Ford liked it, said, that's great, but it's got to be painted Dearborn red, and it's got to say Ford Dearborn. Well, then Henry Danuser said, well, it needs to say Danuser on it. And so they argued it out, and one side goes to Ford Dearborn, one side goes to Danuser. And then he went to see J.I. Case and had a 3-point blade for them. And they said, we like it, has to be painted, the case, I think it was more like an orange back then, and it had to have the eagle with the globe. No, it's got to say Danuser. And so there again, both sides of the equipment, everybody got their marks. And so using those 2 bigger companies with well-known name brand recognition back then, nobody really knew who Danuser was. Danuser didn't make anything. So it was kind of new. So using those marketing channels got the exposure for the Danuser name out. And then Grandpa Henry just took it further and further and started with click pins and ball joints and bar rod ends and clevis ends and so forth. And that's what sparked the OEM.
Henry was also a dairy farmer. He had a well-known dairy in the area, Skygo Farms. And it was Skygo Farms. There was an airstrip out there. There still is an airstrip to this day. And obviously, we've been in business long enough before the standardization of the 3-point hitch. And that's what Glenn was referring to, making equipment to fit all of those tractors. And then obviously, all of the serial number and model number tags that he was talking about. We have such an odd collection of tags for all the types of equipment that we've made through the years. Some of it as an OEM and some of it, obviously carrying the Danuser name. But the OEM business, like for instance, we've supplied John Deere for well over 50 years, probably over 60 years now. It's primarily linkage type equipment. And as Glenn said, virtually all the majors, and quite frankly, a lot of the FEMA members are a lot of our customers as well.
Mm-hmm. That was very fortuitous that he hung in there and negotiated to have the Danuser name. And then I imagine that 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 showed some courage at the time.
I'm sure that was pretty big to go up against those two large companies, but I think he had a vision and he had a dream, and he knew that he needed to get the Danuser name somehow out there. And so
We just keep that Danuser hard-headedness alive today.
very much.
And this was your grandfather.
Correct.
And did his father start the business?
Yes, Casper was Henry's father.
Okay.
And it was officially established in 1910 in Fulton.
Okay. And in the mid-40s is when that was a big defining moment
For the takeoff of the attachments line, and then it grew. And wouldn't you say the OEM business really more flourished under Dad, probably in the 80s? I mean, it started earlier, and then it really took off more in terms of the number of customers and people that we were reaching.
Yeah, Grandpa Henry had to develop the OEM line for his postal diggers and his other attachments, the click pins and the clevises and everything. So he needed those anyway. And then I think it was Dad that basically found that there's a lot of people that could use this type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
See, I like to think that and I don't like to think, but unfortunately we missed out on a lot of our heritage. My grandfather, I was less than 2 when he died. We're the first ones that really have gotten to work with a parent for a long period of time. I think Henry probably worked under Casper for a while, and then he bought the business from his siblings when Casper died. But there's a lot of history that we missed out. We talked to a lot of locals and like, oh, your grandfather did this, or your grandfather would say that, and we learn a lot probably about our own family history that way.
Right.
Well, and I learned a lot about Grandpa through one of the older employees that retired after 50 years, Jimmy Lawrence. And he drove the semis. We had tractor trucks and trailers back then. That's how you hauled it. Your old LTL of YRC roadway, and everybody else wasn't really there.
Well, and before that, on the rail.
the rail.
Our warehouse location was actually on the railroad line because we shipped everything by rail.
So I did a lot of trade shows with Jimmy, and I always enjoyed riding in the truck and say, tell me about Grandpa. And so he'd tell me a lot of stories, and I hear from a lot of people that knew Henry that I have a lot of Henry traits, which I think is great. Never knew the man really, but I do like to have things nice and shiny before I hit the road. I think brand and image is everything. You got to have that. And so
I think the way we look at it, it's sort of like the photographs that are in our front office. Our great-grandfather, it's actually a working photo. He's at a lathe, his hands are dirty, he's a machinist, he's in there. And then there's this one of the, what era is that?
Oh, the Henry photo?
Yeah, the Henry photo. He's actually smoking a cigarette.
He's got his cufflinks and his three-piece suit.
And the one of Dad, he's actually leaning on some product that was outside the paint line. And then we've got our teeny tiny.
Yeah, we get this little picture on the wall.
Yeah, right. Tell us the stories about Grandpa that you were heard on those drives to the shows and some of the people in town.
Well, Grandpa was he was always in a full-blown suit and tie.
I don't think he'd like us calling him Grandpa either. Probably
no.
He probably wouldn't have been a grandpa.
No,
Yeah.
but that's the kind of guy he was. I heard that he was dressed like that even on weekends. Always thinking, always trying to get outside the box. His dairy that Janae spoke of, he was the first in the whole, was it Midwest, I believe, that had stainless steel equipment. And he got that idea, I believe, from a trip to Australia.
I think, yeah.
Yeah, and then had all of it brought over, and he knew that this would be a good thing, and so he really was a outside the box thinker.
He was very entrepreneurial.
Right, and he could make things, and I just imagine the man's mind was constantly spinning and going. I think he had his favorite car was a Mercedes Gullwing, and I heard stories that he always had his trips that he made. He has his same hotels, the same doorman always called him by name. He called them by name. It's great to see you. Oh, it's great to see you. He always knew, he had that one-on-one relationship. So when he found something he enjoyed, he would stick with it. He wasn't, one to go out and say, well, I didn't quite like that hotel. I think I'll go here. No, he stuck with one and made it a home.
And it better be right.
Yeah,
it
had
would be a
to
nice
right.
one. It would be a clean one. It would be professional.
So was Henry a manufacturing type, a sales type? How would you
I think he was
classify?
both. Because
Both.
I think he had a very clever engineering type mind. You see little notes. I've found little notepads and things with drawings on it. Apparently he was always making notes.
Was doodling.
But he was always the quintessential businessman too, I think, that you think of in the 1950s and 60s.
Mm-hmm.
But he had a real good team too. He had
Yeah.
a very unique group of engineers, like the click pins. To make the click pin, you had to drill 2 holes in the pin head. Well, you don't just go shopping on the internet back in the 50s. You don't go shopping through Sears. I mean, where do you go to buy a click pin machine? Well, guess what? There was none. And so one of the head engineers, Clyde Wren, built the machines.
And those are the machines we use to this day. So when it breaks, you can't call someone for parts.
There's no manual.
We've got to figure them out. But I guess that Clyde was sort of he was one of those geniuses that they'd say the morning buzzer would ring and he'd grab his coat. He didn't know if it was lunchtime, time to go home. Was never one that really watched the clock, was just a deep thinker. And yeah, well, you're right. We were very blessed to have some really incredible
so he had a good team.
people through the years.
Yeah. Tell me about Jerry and how his path into the business and what he learned from his father and so forth. Tell me about how he grew the business.
Well, that's a father-son thing, so you handle that, Glenn.
Oh, great. Yeah, see, Dad's still around, and I could get punished for this. So when Henry passed, Dad got left, a big load in his lap.
And how old was Jerry at that?
That would have been 1975, so he would have been, somebody do the math for me. He was born in 43,
yeah.
so.
Young man.
Yeah, and so obviously 75.
Yeah,
and so I was 3 or 4 years old by then, and so he had a couple young kids, and now he inherited a family business, and
he inherited some debt.
And what do I do now? And so I think he really just buckled down and got with the team and kept the focus and continued the projects that I think Grandpa and the team were working on, and then once all that was kind of in the norm and the wheels were up and running, then they kind of got together and said, okay, what do we want to do next? And that's when they started branching out and adding more, more equipment, more to the splitter line, more to the drivers and so forth, and just kind of expanding on it.
Okay, Henry died suddenly. It was a
heart issue.
Heart issue. Okay. And Jerry was working in what capacity at that?
I don't remember what his title was at the time, because I get the sense that it was probably more of, and I'm going to chalk it up to European heritage, maybe that it wasn't the same relationship that we had working with our father growing up, which I think that happens with every generation. You're somehow more relaxed, more comfortable, whereas, then it wasn't the same. So he had mentors that were other people in the company, probably even more so than what he was allowed to speak frankly with his own father, would be my guess.
Yeah, it's no different than like us. A lot of the employees in the shop are fathers, sons, brothers. I mean, they've watched us, grow up and terrorize the shop floor with the bicycle, and then oh my God, who gave Glenn a 4-wheeler? Now he's running that through the shop, and so they've been around. It's just a neat family atmosphere, and so I think when he basically relied on the expertise that says you guys were close to Father. What do you think we ought to do? Well, probably was expanding on this or was talking about this. All right, let's pick it up and let's go with it.
Tell us what happened at that point. What from that chapter that started in '75 up until when the two of you got heavily involved as you did in the '90s, correct? Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, I mean, back then things were really moving. Started to see more overseas competitions trying to come in. Product liability. A lot of that was going on. It was a rough time. Of course, everybody.
The 80s.
The 80s was just a rough year. I mean, we all say we're on this agricultural roller coaster, and we are. And I think it darn fell off the tracks and smacked into a wall back then. 107-year-old company. We had one layoff, and it was back in the 80s when Dad had to lay off the staff.
And obviously that was really tough for us when we hit our 100-year anniversary in 2010, just coming off of 08, 09, 2010. And it's hard to put on a big smile and celebrate when things were so down.
Right.
But I think that we've definitely learned, and this is something that our father taught us and helped start, I think, as well, clearly even back into Henry's days, the diversification. And not just riding with just the ag market. We're in a variety of industries throughout agriculture and construction.
Always remember, keep your eggs in different baskets. Don't pile them all in one, because if that basket breaks, you'd lose your eggs. So you got to be prepared for this. I mean, we would all hate to see everything collapse, but if one thing fell down, you got a couple more divisions to keep the lights on and keep the employees, because you got to take care of them. They're family too.